As Josh and I planned this trip on the Lincoln Highway, I thought it might be cool to take some video of the different ways Lincoln was portrayed on the route. So here we go. I hope you enjoy. The Lincoln Highway begins very inauspiciously in the madhouse that is Times Square, New York City. Although not on the Lincoln Highway, we couldn't pass up this Brooklyn statue that was built in 1869 with Lincoln holding the Emancipation Proclamation and pointing to the phrase, "Forever Free." This was the first statue of Lincoln put up anywhere in America. Seated Lincoln is a 1911 sculpture by Gutzon Borglum, and it's by the Essex County Courthouse in Newark, New Jersey. And obviously, Borglum is famous for his work on Mount Rushmore, and he had a great respect for Lincoln. It was inspired by Borglum's research, reading that Lincoln often sat alone on a bench at the White House garden to gather his thoughts during the American Civil War, particularly when there was bad news. At the 1911 dedication, Teddy Roosevelt said, "Why, this doesn't look like a monument at all," which Borglum took as a great compliment. And because of its accessibility, it's sometimes referred to as the Children's Lincoln. The Mystic Lincoln, also known as the Abraham Lincoln Memorial, is by James Earl Fraser and is located in Jersey City, New Jersey, near Syracuse University. The sculptor is also famous for his depictions on the Buffalo Head nickel. Powerful Lincoln quotes also surround the depiction of the contemplative Lincoln. In 1928, Boy Scouts across the country installed about 3,000 of these markers along the Lincoln Highway to mark the route. Right along the Lincoln Highway in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh, stands the Lincoln statue called Forever Free, named from words taken from the Emancipation Proclamation. This statue by Susan Wagner replaces an original one that stood at this location for over 100 years. It's fun to notice other depictions of Lincoln on the Lincoln Highway, and we'll pull out a few of those as we go along our way on the trip. The return visit statue next to the David Wills House in Lincoln Square is one of my favorite statues of the entire route. Sculpted by J. Seward Johnson, it commemorates Lincoln's visit to Gettysburg in 1863. With his hat, he directs the visitor towards the second floor, where he completed a, quote, "few appropriate remarks," which history now remembers as the 2-minute Gettysburg Address. This sculpture is so realistic. Johnson had detailed information like shoe size, hat measurements, and likely the bronze copies of Lincoln's face and hands made by Leonard Volk. Obviously, along the route, there are many different sculptures of Abraham Lincoln. This one happens to be outside of the Gettysburg Public Library. Outside of the Gettysburg Visitor Center is Ivan Schwartz's statue of Lincoln on the day of his famous speech. The president's approachable pose invites visitors to sit a minute with him. Pictures of a young Lincoln inside the visitor center. The Gettysburg Address Memorial is probably the only monument in the world dedicated to a speech. There is also a sculpture close by of Lincoln by Henry K. Bush Brown. The Gettysburg Address was actually delivered here, where the Soldiers' Memorial now stands, and here's a photo that was actually taken of the time of Lincoln at the spot. Look who we got with us now for the rest of the trip. We have Abe himself is joining us. We're very excited. Abraham Lincoln, the Hoosier Youth, is a sculpture by American artist Paul Manship. It was commissioned in 1928 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It depicts a youthful Lincoln when he lived in Indiana. He wears a handmade shirt, buckskin trousers, and boots. He sits on a tree stump holding a book with an axe leaning against his leg and a dog sitting beside him. The Arch Fountain in Chicago Heights, Illinois was donated to the city in 1916 by the Arch Club of Chicago and placed at the intersection of the Lincoln Highway, started in 1913, and the Dixie Highway, started in 1915. And this caused Chicago Heights to often be referred to as the crossroads of the nation. When we were at the Arch, I didn't realize that right across the street was another sculpture called Lincoln on the Road to Greatness. It was dedicated in 2003 and shows him receiving flowers from two little girls. It's one of the few, if only, depictions of Lincoln smiling. This is Lincoln's personal barouche at the Studebaker Museum in South Bend, Indiana. When I saw this sculpture by Leonard Volk at the Studebaker Museum, I had no idea of the depth behind it. Volk actually made plaster casts of Lincoln's face and hands, which were later used to produce the sculptures that he made and published. It is because of his work that we have such realistic representations of Lincoln. This statue was sculpted by Leonard Crunell and dedicated on September 24, 1930 in Dixon, Illinois. It's the only statue of Lincoln in uniform commemorating his time of service in the Black Hawk War. Well, this will likely be the most unique of the representations of Lincoln along the way. This is entitled Lincoln on Lincoln. So Lincoln on the Lincoln Highway. There he is. This Lincoln statue is a historic structure located on the grounds of the Greene County Courthouse in Jefferson, Iowa. It was erected in 1918 and is individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It was dedicated on September 22, 1918. It was the first statue built beside and dedicated to the Lincoln Highway.
I think he's pointing at you for sure.
This is a really cool homemade structure of Lincoln, and this is in Nevada, Iowa. Just someone did this in their front yard. Outside of the city of Nevada, Iowa, is this school sign with this amazing quote from Lincoln. Very cool. This was just a cool sculpture in a park in Fremont, Nebraska. The Wyoming Parks Commission came up with the idea of celebrating Lincoln's 150th birthday in 1959 with this statue, even though Wyoming didn't even exist as a territory when Lincoln was around. The Parks Commission hired Robert Rusin, Wyoming's best-known sculptor and a big fan of Lincoln. Rusin knew exactly what he wanted, a giant Lincoln head at Sherman Summit, east of Laramie, the highest point on the old coast-to-coast Lincoln Highway, 8,878 feet above sea level. He said he'd been dreaming about this since 1947. And some of his ashes are also deposited here. When people see this statue, they're sometimes critical of the depiction of Lincoln, but for me, it truly captures the tragic life he lived. When you study his life, it's amazing the difficulties that he went through. Also here is a memorial to Henry Joy, the first president of the Lincoln Highway Association, who along with Carl Fisher were basically the brains behind the Lincoln Highway. Look for a future video from me about the history of the Lincoln Highway, and I will tell you more about both of those men. So this is a mural in Sparks, Nevada, kind of a modern day take on an old Lincoln Highway mural. Joe C. Rock began his mural painting in 2009 in the city of Reno, where he has received great accolades for his work. So this bust is in the Capitol building in Carson City, and Lincoln was the one who facilitated Nevada becoming a state. And this, once again, is another of those Leonard Volk statues. As you move through San Francisco, you come to the Legion of Honor, which is an art museum dedicated to World War I veterans. Here is a little plaque that gives you a little bit of history and 4 of the famous people related to the route. And then you come to this very modest little ending point here, the terminus of the Lincoln Highway. It kind of ends the way it is across the country. There are places that celebrate it, are dedicated to it, but typically it's very, very modest in terms of what is there across the country. So Josh and I had an incredible time on this trip, but I leave you with our Lincoln and his upgrade. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video.